or simply in want of a party. Well, my dear friends, how could you know? For I, General Lafayette, have only recently returned back to America after 40 long years. Indeed, my friends, the last time I set foot upon American soil was just after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which of course occurred in September of 1783, ending the Great War for American independence. So thus, I returned in 1784 for 5 months to celebrate with all of you, my beloved brothers and sisters here in America. So, dear friends, on this occasion, even though 40 years have passed, we must never forget how that independence was in fact achieved. For all of those brave soldiers, sailors, and Marines alike who fought and bled upon countless battlefields to achieve American freedom, let us applaud them all! What a delight it is to be back here in America amongst you, my brothers and sisters. You know, my friends, I have been invited back to America courtesy of your very own president of these United States, Monsieur James Monroe, who has called me a guest of the nation to visit all 24 United States. Can you imagine? 24 United States. Do you realize the last time I was here you had but 13? At this rate, you'll have as many as 50 one day. Could you imagine? Oh, but my return was on the 16th of August in New York City in front of 40,000 of its inhabitants. Next, I went forward to Boston, where I met with the second president of the United States, Monsieur Adams, who once referred to me as having a canine appetite for popularity. I asked him to explain that a bit further. But then I went southwards to a place called Philadelphia, which you all know well. In fact, I went to that place where you declared for independence. In fact, I referred to it as Independence Hall. Gosh, I hope that name will stick. But nonetheless, a bit further south to Baltimore City, then to Washington City to meet with the president. But of course, last evening was the 19th of October, indeed the day we celebrate the greatest victory in the war, in which 12 miles down the road, we vanquished our enemy, Lord Cornwallis, at Yorktown. In fact, my friends, I saw most of you there last evening for the celebration. Weren't the fireworks just magnificent? Oh, we danced many of the fine country dances that were so very popular in the third quarter of the 18th century. In fact, madame, I saw you dance nearly all of them. Bravo. But, monsieur, I did see you dip your cup into the punch bowl more than once. But I suppose there was much to celebrate. But, friends, now that I have returned, I am certainly reminded of what first inspired me to cross the great ocean and take part in this noble crusade. For, friends, I first heard of this cause back in 1775. Oh, back then I was but a sous-lieutenant, a second lieutenant, newly promoted to the rank of captain. In truth, only because my father-in-law owned the regiment, so it was a bit of a wedding gift. Well, there I found myself billeted in the eastern part of France, in a city referred to as Metz. And as was commonplace back then, we would often have these grandiose dinner parties with all of the most noble officers in attendance. And there we would typically speak about the various subjects of the day. Perhaps a war that had begun, a war that had concluded, a new treaty that had been signed, perhaps a new innovation in strategy or in tactics. But on one occasion, we had a very special guest, and this guest was none other than the Duke of Gloucester. Indeed, many of you are familiar with the main route here, the route principale in Williamsburg, called the Duke of Gloucester. But you might ask, well, who is this Duke of Gloucester? Well, at that moment, that was the brother to George III, the King of England. But unlike his brother, the Duke of Gloucester was rather sympathetic to the American cause. In fact, many were of the opinion that he thought America should be free and independent. So, of course, we all listened in on what he had to say. Now, of those present there that evening, there was the famous Comte de Broglie. Many of you might remember him from his exploits during the 7 Years' War, and there were even some who said that he was going to be given command of the Continental Army in the place of General George Washington. Now, the Comte de Broye was a fine officer, to be sure, but I think we are all thankful that General Washington remained in command, are we not? Goes without saying. There was, of course, my beloved friend, le Baron de Kolb, the one man perhaps most responsible for bringing me here to America. I can still recall receiving the sad dispatch of the news of his death after the Battle of Camden in August of 1780. Most distressful to me, but even more so to the great cause of American freedom, for he was such a fine officer. There was, of course, the Chevalier de Buisson. Madame, the Chevalier de Buisson. I thought I recognized you. Madame, you danced a minuet with him at the last of the Queen's birthday parties, didn't you? Oh, come now, you are being quite modest, madame. You are still the talk at Versailles. Oh, my dear friends, she danced, I think, the most magnificent minuet I have ever seen dance before. Do you recall the name? Oh, how could you forget? It was called Le Dauphin. Perfectly stepped, not one error. Madame, I think you must have worked with your dance master for weeks, if not months. And upon conclusion of that perfect minuet, what did the Queen say to you? C'est magnifique. It is magnificent. And you know very well the Queen never gave compliments to anyone but herself. Madame, you know, if only I could find a few musicians here this afternoon, we could all see an example of that minuet. Would you like that, my friends? Oh, who are we kidding, my friends? We'll never find any musicians awake before 6 p.m. on a Sunday. Another time, madame, but rest assured you are still the talk at Versailles. Well, forgive me, my friends, I have veered off the course of my subject. Let me return. So, that evening, we spoke of many subjects. We spoke of the fighting at Lexington and at Concord. We spoke of the Grand Congress in Philadelphia. And of course, we spoke of the great man himself, that of General Washington. So it was by the conclusion of this meal that I told my brother officers that I was ready and willing to fight and, if need be, die for this cause. Now I know what you're all thinking. Why, Monsieur le Marquis? Why would you want to go and fight and perhaps die in another man's war? For France and England were not at war at that moment. Why would you want to risk yourself in such an endeavor? Well, I think you know the answer to that question. For this had been a war like none other in the history of man, had it not? This was a war of great ideas, of the freedom, even the liberation of mankind. A war that had embraced the ideas of the great thinkers of what we often refer to as this enlightened age, or this age of reason, with men like Voltaire and Rousseau and Montesquieu, of which they were speaking of representation in government, of an equality of a man, that a man, no matter what station in life they might be born, whether they be black or white, Catholic or Protestant, rich or poor, slave or free, should not make a difference, but simply by the way in which that person would carry themselves and prove themselves in this world. My dear friends, after these more than 40 long years, are you still in agreement with these great ideas? Well, I am pleased to hear it, for as am I, and as I shall continue to be until my dying days. So thus, that evening I rose up from my chair, I drew my sword, I came towards my host, the Comte de Broye, and told him I was ready to put my colors to this great and noble cause. Well, I went to Versailles. I requested of the king that I might go on this grand adventure, and alas, unfortunately, the king told me that I could not go. But I was so inspired by this great cause that I disobeyed the king. I left my regiment. I went to the western part of France, and there at the port city of Bordeaux, I purchased a ship fittingly called La Victoire and set sail across the great ocean for the Americas. Now, I would land at a place called Georgetown in South Carolina. Now, I do recall this evening perfectly well, for even though it was evening, the moon was so bright that it illuminated everything that we looked upon. So as I put my foot upon American soil for the first time and met you, the good people of the United States, well, what do you think my first impressions were of you, the people of the United States of America? perfect. It's better not to answer that question. For sadly, it was not a very good one. For you know, the first Americans I met here in America actually tried to kill me. Not a good beginning. So we had landed at the plantation of a Monsieur Auger, a Benjamin Sugar, or Ougie is the way they pronounce it there in South Carolina, an ardent patriot, but he had mistaken me and my companions for Englishmen. Now, can you imagine, Monsieur, mistaking me for an Englishman? Do you know, in hindsight, I don't think the moon was that bright. Well, I quickly assured them that we were not. We were there to help them in their great and glorious cause, and once they realized this, they welcomed us with open arms. But, friends, we were not there upon a holiday, were we? We needed to make our way as quickly as possible to Philadelphia City. So, after bidding farewell, after thanking them for their kindness, their hospitality, and most assuredly for not killing us, we began that long journey northwards. It took us several more weeks, but eventually I would arrive in Philadelphia City, the largest city in former English North America, and its 40,000 souls. Now, my friends, before I had departed France, I had met with an American agent, a representative from Connecticut named Silas Dean. And he had promised that if I, the Marquis de Lafayette, were to come to America, I would be granted the rank of Major General in the Continental Army. So there I was, promissory note in hand, and I approached your Congress. I said to them, honor me so, by granting me a command in the Continental Army, that I too might fight against tyranny. And now what does Congress say to me? Thank you for coming, Monsieur le Marquis. We appreciate you offering your services, but we don't need, nor do we even want your help. Now, can you imagine this, my friends? What I had endured up to that moment. I had left my regiment. I had disobeyed the King and Queen of France. I had traveled 8 long weeks at sea, seasick nearly every day. I had nearly been killed by the first Americans I met here in America. I had traveled from South Carolina all the way to Philadelphia in the month of July, just to be told by your members of Congress to return back to France. Well, I ask all of you present here today, what would you have done? Would you have returned back to France? No. Of course not. You would persevere. You would overcome. You would triumph in the end, just as I had done. So, again, I attempted to speak to Congress, saying, very well, you will not give me a command of soldiers, but perhaps you will allow me to serve as an aide-de-camp to General Washington, as an assistant to the great man. And again they said to me, I'm sorry, Monsieur le Marquis, but once again, this is just not possible. Besides, we don't have enough money to pay you. Well, my friends, I finally said boldly to your members of Congress, then I shall serve at my own expense. And would you know it, with those immortal words, your Congress immediately made me a Major General. I could not imagine this good fortune, for as I have stated already, I was but a captain in the French army, and a newly promoted one at that. But here, in America, I was made a Major General, a General of Division. I could command upwards of 5,000 soldiers, yet I never commanded more than 50 in my entire life, and all at the age of 19. Well, good fortune followed me again. For that very next evening, the people of Philadelphia were holding a ball for General Washington, a party. Madam, you know all about parties, don't you? But this one held in honor of General Washington for defending the city of brotherly love. And how I recall when he walked into the room, for I knew precisely who he was before he spoke, even though we had never met before. It was simply by the way in which he carried himself, for to me, he was truly an aristocrat without the name, a nobleman without the title. He came forth, he held out his hand, he said to me, I thank you, Monsieur le Marquis, for coming to support this cause. Think of this new place as your new home. Think of the officers around you as your new family. And think of me as your new friend. And with this, I could not help myself. I immediately embraced him. In fact, I think I might have embarrassed him a little bit with my French custom. But I said to him, from now on, mon général, j'ai deux patries, la France et les États-Unis d'Amérique. From now on, I shall have 2 countries, France and the United States of America. And thus, my great adventure had begun. Do you know, my friends, even before I set foot upon American soil, I heard of this great city of Williamsburg. In fact, I can recall reading in the Gazettes of France about the last of your royal governors, and I promise you he shall be the last royal governor, John Murray IV, Earl of Dunmore, who made his way down the main boulevard, the Duke of Gloucester. And there, before the former Capitol building, he did in fact dissolve your House of Burgesses, your voice in government. But would you, my dear Virginians, would you remain quiet for long? Indeed not, for first you would rise up as Virginians, May the 15th of 1776, and declare for independence. But of course, you could not win this war alone. You would not win this war alone. You would need help from somewhere and somehow. And that help came in the form of 13 former colonies that have now formed 13 United States and this great land of the United States of America. We had seen the war come to Virginia. We had seen it come to Williamsburg. In fact, I recall hearing of the turncoat himself, that of Benedict Arnold, traveling through the streets of Williamsburg in April of 1781. Followed shortly thereafter by Lord Cornwallis himself, bringing smallpox and the martial law. My division would have the honor of liberating this city, and we would welcome the arrival of General Washington himself, that would lead to our great victory at Yorktown, the 19th of October, 1781. Dear friends, so much has changed, yet there is still so much left to do. Do you realize the last time that I saw His Excellency, General George Washington, was in 1784. We spent 2 glorious weeks together at his beloved Mount Vernon, there reflecting upon the war and the future of this nation. We rode on to a place called Annapolis in Maryland. We said goodbye to many of the officers we had the honor and privilege of serving with. And then we rode on to a place called Marlborough in Maryland. And that is where I would say my goodbyes to the General. But not before he said this to me. He said, "Monsieur le Marquis, I sincerely believe that the easy part was winning this war." Of course, I could not imagine he would say such a thing, after all of the trials and tribulations we had been forced to endure. But he explained himself further by saying, "I do believe that the much more difficult part will be for these 13 former colonies that have now formed 13 United States, well, getting along with one another, surviving into the future." Well, dear friends, look at how far you have gone. From 13 to 24 United States. You have endured war, civil strife, turmoil, yet you have endured. And why is that? Well, I dare say it is because of the foundation that was built at the price of so much sacrifice and blood by you, the American patriot. In fact, I will go further. I will say that one day this nation shall serve as a beacon for all other nations to look to as the truest example of freedom and of independence. God bless you all, my dear friends, and God bless this great nation of the United States of America. I thank you, my dear friends, and I thank you for allowing me the time to speak with you this afternoon. And now, as we finish our lunch, I would ask that all of you, when you are ready, to please make your way where you did last evening, as we shall prepare to go into the historic area. So gather your things and prepare to march out once again. And I thank you again for your hospitality, your kindness. I believe that all of the answers to the future might be found in the past if we study our history. And by you supporting this wonderful institution of Colonial Williamsburg, you enable us to continue to tell those stories of the past that, God willing, we will make better citizens of the future. so I shall see you all shortly as we will march into the historic area. Thank you once again, my dear friends.